Hi, welcome to the Legislators Lounge. I'm Jim Webb, your host, and my co-host is Brian Chirichiello. Today we're doing show number 6, which is on the budget, for the state budget. And with us today we have Representative Gene Chandler, who's a former Speaker of the House and current Minority Leader for New Hampshire House right now. And we also have, and he's from Bartlett. We also have Lynne Ober from Hudson, who's a Representative Lynne Ober from Hudson. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, Representatives.
Nice to be back.
We appreciate you coming on our show to talk about the budget. And it wasn't that long ago in the House that we actually talked about HB 1 and HB 2. And so I'll turn it over to you, and if you want to touch some on some important points about what we've gone through, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm. I'll just start by kicking in. Lynn's going to give you, she'll work with all the numbers. She's the one that dealt with all this all the way through. But just an overview to start. You know, obviously, Republicans, we are in the minority. One thing that, after being elected minority leader, that I stressed that I would be doing is making sure that we work very hard on the budget the way we thought it should come out. But more importantly, was to make sure that the revenue estimates that the House relied on, and eventually the Senate, and eventually the whole budget process, revenue estimates were reasonable. We got in a lot of trouble a few years ago because the Democrats used highly inflated revenues, and they will say, well, it was it wasn't the economy. The economy wasn't good, but Representative Major, who is our revenue, or my revenue guru, has been since back before I was Speaker. Invariably, I have not known him to be any more than 1% or less off any time, and that's over 2 years, which is remarkable. Wow. And we can get into this a little later. He's going to be on this budget. That we're finishing now, he's going to be that close. And if anything, the revenues are going to be a little higher. So we said, this is what we're going to rely on this. And if we'd have relied on Representative Major's revenue estimates 4 years ago, we wouldn't have been in the tremendous $800 million deficit that we ended up in. So having said all that, that was our goal, was to make sure we really pushed for reasonable revenue estimates and budget spending that was sustainable. And I think we did that. I'm very pleased to say that every single Republican voted for House Bill 1 and House Bill 2. Every single, didn't lose one. So that was remarkable, because I'm sure as you follow in the news stories, being Republicans, we have a wide variety of members who speak out on a wide variety of topics. But the important things are, when it comes down to protecting the taxpayers of the state of New Hampshire, we are united in that effort. So that'll be my opening statement, and we'll talk about some specifics and figures, and Lynn can talk about some of those. So.
Great. And Lynn, you're in, is it Finance 1? Is it 3 separate divisions of finance?
Finance is divided into 3 permanent subdivisions: Division 1, Division 2, and Division 3. And the easy way to do this, Division 3 does Health and Human Services, which is about 50% of the budget. Division 2 does the Education, Safety, which includes state troopers, Fish and Game, the lottery, and Division 1 does the 47 other budgets that are heard in the House and in the Senate.
Very good. And you're a member,
Division 1.
Division 1. And what kind of conversations did you have in that committee?
I think you have to look at the entire process. And I tell people this is like a football game. There are 4 quarters. And this time we have a new governor for the first time in 8 years. So although Governor Hassan was on Senate Finance, working with the budget from the governor's office has been a little more challenging and a little more difficult. But the first phase is for the governor to get her budget out. That has to be out by February 15th. That is state law. This year she did not make that. She got House Bill 1 out, but it was almost 21 days later before she managed to get out the rest of the budget, which is known as House Bill 2. Then the House is like the second quarter in a football game. And we go through that line by line by line. We had about 2,500 budget pages this year. The House itself has to vote on that the end of March, but before the March revenues come in. It passes to the Senate, and they again go through the budget and make their changes. That's quarter 3. Well, it's no different than mom and dad at home. We don't entirely agree between the House and the Senate on how we're going to spend our money, number 1. Number 2, the Senate has the benefit of a lot more revenue. The House passes the budget before the March revenues are out. The big month for revenues is April because that's when business taxes are paid. And I will tell you, April just ended, and it ended far up above our expectations. Everybody is ecstatic. And then they also have the May revenue. So they actually have 3 months of actuals, and they can adjust their spending more than the House can. Then there's a committee of conference when members from both the House and the Senate get together, work out a compromise, goes back to both bodies, and in theory needs to be passed by June 30th because the fiscal year starts on July 1st.
Ordinarily work out a compromise.
Ordinarily work out a compromise, yes.
I have a question for Gene, because, either one of you can answer it. You can jump in at any time, by the way, too, if you want. But this particular one is, I've actually read and do a lot of my research on the internet before the show, and I was reading that there are some Democrats that are actually claiming that we did not have a deficit last time around, or they left us. They left the Republicans in a surplus when they left. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I'm dumbfounded that would actually be out there as a statement.
I'd like to echo that,
Right,
yes.
Yeah, I can't even imagine who would be saying that or what they'd be referring to. I know no one who, no matter which side you're on, who has said anything like that, because it's just, now you can argue a little semantics over the amount. I mean, it was at 750 million, 800, 820. I mean, and then there's always a way to get a different number a little bit, but the bottom line is, even if, agree on 700 million if you want, I don't know, but it certainly was a huge deficit, just no question about it, that we were faced with, and which is kind of, it gets a little laughable this time when they talk about, which it doesn't even look like there is going to be one during this now. I'm reasonably confident that we will perhaps even have a slight surplus to the budget that Republicans passed 2 years ago. But even if it isn't surplus, the deficit we were talking about was peanuts. Even if it had stayed at the 38 or 40 million that some people were talking about a couple months ago, right, compared to what we were left 2 years ago, that's not even, I mean, you got to worry about it, but it's hardly worth worrying about in a way, I guess, because it's just not much money. But certainly, I'm not sure who that is or where they're getting that, but there was a huge, and you can look at independent people that agreed on that aren't partisan, and
Right,
just said, yeah, this is a deficit.
Yeah, Jim and I know firsthand because that's when we first got elected, so we know the hard work that we did 2 years ago when the Republicans were in the majority. And we made some cuts that were tough, but we had to because of we had such a big hole to fill. So.
Well, let me toss in a fact that most people don't ever talk about. During the committee conference, remember that's the fourth quarter, it's passed the House, it's passed the Senate, we haven't agreed, we now have to work out a compromise. During the committee of conference, which happened in June, and this is the first June that Bill O'Brien was Speaker, so it's the first into the first session when you guys were first elected, Governor Lynch appeared before the committee of conference. I was chairing the committee of conference on House Bill 2 and told the committee that even if he used all of the rainy day funds with all the executive orders he'd put in to stop spending, he was still several $1 million in the red. And he begged us to make yet another cut. And Senator Chuck Morse actually wrote an amendment that he brought to the committee of conference that we passed because Governor Lynch came and said his budget was in the red. So there is no doubt. The interesting thing is, just like the revenues for April that we just closed. At the end of June 2 years ago, those revenues were up more than what we thought. So we actually ended up with a small surplus because of a really good June month with lots of tourism. So we had lots of rooms and meals.
Well, I'd like to talk a little about that because, for instance, in New Hampshire here, we depend on these revenues from particularly our tourist industry and rooms and meals tax and gasoline tax and all that kind of stuff. Now, do we see a cycle? Okay, well, this is going to be a good month, but we know, and say, April or February, it's going to be a bad month. Is there like does it ebb and flow? Do you see that kind of? And is that
I
all
don't think
figured in?
not necessarily. It's hard to predict what's going to be a bad month compared to the year before, but there are months that the revenues are less, and there are peak months. And once again, that's what, in Representative Major and the people that work with those all the time, they can tell you what our best month of the year is, which is, I believe, April, as a matter of fact.
April's our best month of
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
And Norm's prone to saying, oh, February, it's a low month.
Right.
Right.
So he, with his experience, he's got that.
Right.
And you can generally, because these April revenues are up so much, which is good, and we all encourage that, it gives the Senate another, I don't call it a leg up, but they do kind of have a leg up because, as Representative Ober explained, they get the budget after, and it's a lot clearer, different things. And because of April revenues being up, and Norm will look at those very carefully as well as make sure there's no just a blip for some reason. If it's a normal progression of the business taxes coming in higher, it's something you can expect to continue at some level the next year. So that bodes well for next year too. So that's encouraging.
Interesting.
All right, well, I'd like to expand a little bit because, like you said, the business tax coming in. This session so far, we've seen several taxes that have been voted on the floor, increases, particularly the gas tax, that bill passed, which will raise gasoline by as much as 12 cents a gallon.
Heating oil as well.
Heating oil for the fund for the heating oil, so that put an increase on that, which was, I think it was 25% or something like that. And then let's see, what else do we have? The tobacco tax, they raised 91%.
Was it registration fees as well?
I don't think
Marriage
they went for that
licenses.
yet.
Marriage licenses.
Well, yeah, now that hit.
Other things.
That one there, I'm a justice of the peace, so I see that one, everybody. So I got to always keep that, so I can tell them what it's going to cost them at town hall. And we repealed that last session, and then they put it back in. So there's all these taxes that they're actually Obamacare. How's Obamacare going to affect us? I see that that's a big one. Is it going to affect the state and the state's budget?
I think it's going to affect the state and the state's budget, but I will tell you that is not reflected in the budget that we worked on. So for the next 2 years, there's no funding for Obamacare. There's no funding for any costs that will fall to the state. And we've heard estimates from $7 million to $30 million a year that could cost the state. Nobody really knows yet. It's still in its infancy, but there are $0 in the budget for that.
Yeah. And I think that's what's particularly discouraging, that we moved ahead with this program, obviously, despite some of us that don't think it's such a good idea, but no one seems to know. I'm not alone, you all and everyone out there hears something one day, comes up, okay, this is a consequence of Obamacare. Something they hadn't planned on or didn't tell anyone or whatever. And that's what's very frustrating, as Representative Ober said, how they don't know, so they can't plan. And that's particularly distressing, I think. And some of the other taxes that were passed, the cigarette tax I'll speak to a little bit. Obviously, the cigarette tax was going to go up to 10 cents because we built in a sunset clause 2 years ago if we didn't reach some certain amount of revenues. And actually, that's coming in better now, too. But it didn't reach it, so that would have automatically gone up 10 cents in July or August, somewhere July. And then the House, with the House raised, Ways and Means raised it 10 more.
20. Right? So Ways and Means put it up at
Another 10.
Another 10 for a total of 20 cents a pack. The governor put 30 cents a pack in the budget.
And I realize people say, well, the smoking, it'll help stop smoking. Well, that's a whole other argument. We have a cigarette tax to raise money. If they want to do something else with smoking, I commend it, and people shouldn't smoke.
Right.
But the problem is that we as Republicans are concerned about is the cross-border sales and the things that it's hard to quantify. But people come to this. If our cigarette taxes are that much lower than our neighboring states, Massachusetts, Maine, and Vermont, people come over here to buy them. They just don't buy cigarettes and leave. They buy gas, alcohol, food, stay overnight. They may go do all these other things to help our economy, and I think that has shown in some of the increases that we've had. So we just don't support going up any more than the 10 cents that was going to go up automatically.
Right, right.
The interesting thing about the taxes, we passed them on the floor of the House. We did. The Democrats put every one of those into the back of House Bill 2. So even if the Senate stops a bill, an individual bill, those taxes still exist in the budget bills, in the 2 budget bills. They even put all of the gas tax into House Bill 2 the night that we passed the gas tax on the floor of the House.
So what does that mean? That means that that increase is going to happen? I mean, without
It
the
means it
Senate-
has to be stopped in 2 places.
Okay.
Okay. That's why I was going to ask you to explain House Bill 2. It's been referred to as the Christmas tree bill.
We call it affectionately the trailer bill. House Bill 1 has got every penny that the state is going to spend, with some caveats about the spending, because there are always some caveats that need to be in there. For example, DRA is doing a reorganization, so they have what we call budgetary footnotes in House Bill 1 that explains the budgetary reorganization, where the money came from, where it's moving, because it had no budget in previous years, so that has to be explained. House Bill 2 traditionally has been all of the legislative changes that need to be enacted in order to support the budget. And so if the governor spends an additional 30 cents per pack on cigarette tax, she puts that in House Bill 2 to support the revenue spending that she made in House Bill 1, because we are a balanced budget state, so we don't borrow money like California to balance our budget. So we have to have revenues to balance it out, and that's why 4 years ago, when the revenue estimates were so much higher than what revenue was going to be, it looked like it was balanced until we got to the end of the year, and then we had Governor Lynch in the Committee of Conference begging us to give him some more cuts so that he could balance his budget.
Right. Wow.
And when you ask if some of these taxes, how to stop them, well, it is a twofold approach. And one of the things that's going to happen, I mean, there's such a disconnect between the House budget and what the Senate budget is going to look like.
Right.
Obviously, the House is controlled by Democrats, the Senate is controlled by Republicans. And literally, the list of what the Senate is going to change is huge. It just is. And it is coming up with a compromise by the end of June is, I guess
That's where all the
say
work's
it's
going to
be a
begin.
very difficult task, one of which I can't imagine happening, to be perfectly honest, but nonetheless, we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, there are some other difficulties. The governor put in 20 million or 21.4 million expected revenue for a tobacco settlement. House Democrats kept that in. That tobacco settlement came in this year,
So we're gonna use
and
it
the
now.
governor has already been in the newspaper saying she is spending the money now. So that leaves a $20 million hole next year in 2014, because the money she thought she was get, which is one-time money, she is spending now. That's why when you see the business taxes come in so much higher this April, you get a little breath of relief, because otherwise you're looking at cutting $20 million worth of cuts because you're spending the money this year. It would be like if you get a paycheck and we can give you 3 months worth of your paycheck for the previous year, and you take it and you spend it now on a new car, and then next year you have 3 months where you work with no pay. How do you pay your bills?
Right. And just for our viewers, we want to let everybody know that state budget's for 2 years.
Yes.
Just in case no one knew. But so
July
we're working on
1st.
it now, and it's going to be for the next 2 years.
Starting
Yes.
July 1st, the new budget.
Right. One big concern that I heard while we were sitting down listening to a lot of testimony and stuff about the budget was the no money in the budget for counties that they were going to take out that would be made up from local property taxpayers. Now, in Derry, we're having a hard time because the taxes are going to go through the roof in the next couple of months. We've got a big issue. We may be the highest paid town in the state for property taxes. So how would this play out as far as if the state doesn't provide the county with the money that they look or depend on? How is that going to affect us?
What they did in the budget is the state cut the money that they normally would provide to the county for nursing home services. In Hillsborough County, that amounts, and I live in Hillsborough, I know you're in Rockingham,
Right.
that amounts to a 2% tax increase across the board for the loss of that money. I don't know what that percentage is in Rockingham.
Yeah, I don't either.
But
I'm
I
sorry,
would
I didn't think
imagine
That's okay.
it
But
is
it's huge. It's
something, it's huge.
Well, I'm on
not a
the,
negligible amount, trust me. in
I'm on the
Rockingham County.
executive committee in Rockingham County, and our largest single expense is the nursing home for Rockingham County.
Yes.
So do the taxpayers out there, will they be expecting an increase in their property taxes now that
Yes.
money's gone?
Unless something happens on the Senate
In the
side.
Senate side.
And I can tell you, I know they're looking very strongly at that, and I think that's going to be an issue, another one of the issues of contention that will be sought out in a committee conference. But yeah, that's a huge amount for some county. Well, it's a huge amount for every county. So yeah.
Right.
But here's an interesting thing about budgets. I don't care what the budget line item is. There's a constituency that says, don't cut me, cut them.
Right.
So, don't cut the money to the county nursing homes. Cut, and they don't care what it is as long as you cut them. And every budget line item has got that. The university got more funding this biennium than it did in the previous two. The state pays 6%, or had paid 6% of overall university funding. And 2 years ago, because of the fact we're running the deficit and we were still in the recession and revenues were down, that funding was cut by nearly 50%. So we only paid 3% of the funding to the universities. That money has gone up, but it hasn't gone up to the level that the governor said it would when she was campaigning. Right. So I can tell you House Finance members have gotten 30, 40, 50 emails, sometimes a day, but still going on a week, saying, why aren't you restoring all the money the governor said she was going to restore? But even the governor didn't restore all the money she said she was going to restore when she was campaigning. Right. And there has to be that balance between every line item, and it's very difficult. So that 2% in Hillsborough is going to have a really negative impact on every taxpayer in Hillsborough, and I would imagine every other county is going to feel the same.
I mean, you've got to balance off, and I'm not going to pick on the university system particularly, but since that was where we were, it is true what she's saying. There are different constituencies, but you've got to balance off the fact that I'm sure you have senior citizens, low-income people are having a tough time paying their property taxes.
Yes.
So are we going to put more of a burden on them so the university system can have more money and continue their bureaucracy at the level they've got it at? That doesn't make any sense to me. I'd like to fund the university system, no problem.
Right.
But when it comes to taxpayers in the county tax and the downshifting, that's the worst thing. The state should not be downshifting these things.
Well,
So,
here's an interesting caveat out of the university system. We have public hearings. We had them come talk to us, and then they go to Division 2. When they were talking to the full finance committee, we actually asked them if we restored their funding, because they said we would freeze in-state tuition for the next year. We said, how about freezing athletic spending? How about freezing what you're paying the hockey coach? Because he has got one of the highest salaries in the state. And they refused to commit to freezing spending on athletic programs. And yet, to my way of thinking, maybe it's backwards, my way of thinking is the money should go on academics and should not be going on to athletics. We are not a powerhouse university for an athletic sport in any sport, football, basketball.
Right.
I mean, our hockey coach, we're rated, number 4 in the nation for hockey, and the hockey coach certainly is paid for that, but shouldn't that be where we make cuts to non-academic programs?
Well, like you said, we have to prioritize, because if the pool of money is small, you got to
it is,
really
and it's just
make it
crazy. The president of the UNA, which I found to be insulting myself personally, but I mean, he was widely quoted saying, yeah, if you restore all our funding, we will freeze tuition at the level it's at now. Well, I'm thinking, my grandfather taught me to make a better deal than that. If we're going to restore
an
all your
increase.
money, go back to the scholarship level you were at 2 years ago. So he wanted it from both ends. He wanted all the money they'd gotten for the increases plus the state's increase. And I'm thinking, wow, what a deal.
Well, as a representative, we see, you see, I see, Brian, we all get the emails. Whenever there's an issue that's going to affect somebody,
yes, yep.
all of a sudden we're getting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails on that particular issue. Like, for instance, last term we saw they were threatened, somebody told somebody that they were going to cut the bookmobile. The next thing you know, you get 300 emails, oh, I need that bookmobile and this and that, which we didn't cut, and it wasn't even accurate, that particular program. It was up to the individual towns or libraries to see how they were going to do their things. But once they get the people motivated, then we get the call. So everybody's saying, don't do it to me. So,
That's exactly right.
meanwhile, everybody's paying, the property tax owner has the burden to make up the difference, and being going to be soon to be the highest property tax in the state, not counting the county yet, which is going to add more.
Right. Well, I'm sorry for you. I can say that, but.
Yeah. Now, in SB 152, the gambling bill, isn't did they make mention that if the $40 million or $80 million, that's the fee that they would pay up front, a portion of that would go to UNH right off the top, the application fee?
Page 33, SB 152 has 44 pages, and on page 33, they actually have spelled out the percentages of where all the money from the gaming would come. The university gets some, the community college gets some. Maggie Hassan has created a 3-person commission for the North Country. This is on page 36, Jim. You're taking notes. You want to
No,
look it up?
I see. We've done 2 shows on the gambling bill, so we know quite a bit about
Of
it.
taking this 3-person commission to do enhancement for the North Country, and they're estimated to get something like $7 million the first year, $9 million the second, $11 million the third. There are no duties. There's no ideas what they're going to do, but here's a huge chunk of money being diverted there with no plan
Or who
behind
they're
it.
going to give it to, even, really. I mean,
Or who
it's
they're
like-
going to give it to, except for salaries for 3 people,
Right.
and salaries are not specified as how much they will be. The highway fund gets a big chunk of money trying to offset some of the proposed gas tax. So it's well spelled out, but the university is getting a chunk, as is the community college.
And I think the one thing, and we can have the argument, and we all know where everyone stands on the gambling issue, and that is an argument that is being ongoing now. But the big thing where even supporters of casino slots, whatever may be, where, especially on the Republican side, where we unite is being in opposition to having it as part of the budget. It's just, that's almost indefensible, because even the fees that we'll be getting, the so-called $80 million licensing fee, the chances of getting that during the 2-year budget are so small. It's almost, I'd like to say it's not going to happen, but it's never happened anywhere else before that it's happened that quickly. And if it does happen that quickly, the state has probably not done a good enough job writing the requirements. That's the thing. So it's part of the budget. It's, in my opinion, very irresponsible. We can have the other gambling argument separate.
Oh no, as a supporter of gambling, I'll agree with you 100% that we can't, it shouldn't have been in the budget because it's not guaranteed revenue yet, and nothing's even passed yet, so how can you add it to the budget?
Right. Now, it was not in the House budget,
Well, it isn't in our current House
but the
budget.
governor had it in her budget,
No,
right?
she actually didn't. She gave her speech and said she supported gambling. She anticipated $80 million in revenue, and she spent that money.
Okay.
But she didn't put it into House Bill 2. Then Senate Bill 152 passed in the Senate, which happens to mirror the money she spent. The House did not put it into House Bill 2 and did not spend the money through some creative sources. Susan Almy finally raised her revenue estimates another %, and that covered what they were short. And so they actually didn't spend it, but they did go back and raise their revenues in Ways and Means.
Well, that leads into another one, as you say, you got creative. What we see is funds being raided all the time. I mean, that's we hear it all the time in the House, but is it a dedicated fund? Can we raid that fund? Tell me a little bit about that and the process of what's happening with that.
There are 300 dedicated funds. And every dedicated fund started with somebody passing a bill, lobbying to take this piece of revenue and in perpetuity preserving it for this project. And the reason was if it got into the budget and it got cut, they didn't get to do that. So probably every one of those funds at some point in time was a budget line item that got cut during one of the budget processes, and the constituents of that budget line got a rep to file a bill for a dedicated fund.
Right.
Some of those things really rack up the money, and there's very little accounting how much you're getting, what you're really spending on it, how much value we're getting. So some of them have a lot of money sitting in, some of them are very tiny, and you can, because there's so little revenue, you can track them. But the idea was the governor wanted blanket authority to raid any fund throughout her tenure. House Finance gave her authority to balance 2013, and now she's gotten the tobacco money, which is what she spent on doing that, and she's gotten more revenue in April. So I'm not sure she's going to raid a dedicated fund.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is it's still in the budget.
It is.
The Finance Committee did put in that it would have to at least go to anything she wanted to do would have to go to the Fiscal Committee. I still am very much opposed to that. It's wrong to give the governor even that much authority, so 10 members of a committee can decide what is clearly a legislative prerogative. Whether you agree with dedicated funds or don't agree with them or should
Right.
have some or not, it's just clearly the legislature's prerogative what to do with those funds, and the governor should not in any way have any ability to do that without coming to the legislature, in my opinion.
But she also spent some of that money for, if, in actual fact, the highway fund is a dedicated fund.
Right.
And by state law, beginning July 1st, 2013, safety should spend no more than 26% of the money going into the highway fund. And the reason they have it, their state patrols are keeping your roads safe, just as repairing a pothole is keeping your roads safe.
Yeah.
And the governor ripped off 38% of the total income for the highway fund and put it into state police.
Right.
38%.
No,
We
so
actually talked about that with the gas
with
tax.
the gas tax. That's why I wrote that down, because I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that I asked you about that
Yeah.
and how that money, if we actually had the money we collected for our gas taxes, would our roads be able to be
Yeah.
repaired?
Well,
That
it
was the-
certainly would if all the money that's going to safety went to the highway fund, but that means you're creating, if
Another
that goes,
hole,
a
right.
75 approximately $1 million hole in the general fund budget to fund the state troopers. But the other thing which would go a long way to helping would be just the difference if we live by the law of the 26% thing. I think that's 25 or 27 million dollars that the governor is proposing, higher than what the law allows.
Exactly.
That would go a long way. Now, it's not going to cure anything, but it would be nice to have an extra 25 million kicking around.
Right.
And that's been part of my concern, my biggest concern against why I voted against the gas tax. There were some reasons, but that's the biggest one. Because if we can't control ourselves, when we the legislature passed a law saying what the percentage that safety can take, if we don't have the fortitude, we and the governor, to stick to that, what's going to happen when we have all this rest of this money coming in?
Right.
My gosh, they'll be taking it for everything. And that's the thing.
Yeah, one of the dedicated funds that I'm very familiar with as being a realtor is the LCHIP fund. And what I see at every closing is people, it's a tax, basically, it's $7.50 per
Right.
thousand. The buyer and the seller pay their portions of it. But a lot of times the buyers will say, well, what's this all about? And they're told, well, this money is set aside so that the state can buy open space. And now, now we're seeing or hearing that a lot of this money is getting swept into filling.
And I will defend that by at least saying the legislature did it.
Okay.
It didn't the governor coming in rating. The legislature did that. I mean, we're the one that did it. Now, you can argue whether the legislature should have done it, whether it should go to the general fund and not go to the general fund, and that's a good argument to have, but at least it was done.
2 budget cycles in a row before the current governor. The governor proposed using the money before it came to the legislature. We just didn't override what he proposed. So it came in his budget to us, and he had spent the revenue, and to give it back to LCHIP, we would have had to make additional cuts in budget line items, and the legislature chose not to make those cuts.
Right.
But it did come from the governor to the legislature, and then the legislature said it's easier to spend the money on the program, you know, whether it's supporting cultural fairs, whether it's funding the disabled wait list, whether it's funding nursing homes. It was easier to take the LCHIP money, and we did that 2 budget cycles in a row at the governor's request.
Right.
Now, being on the Fish and Game Committee, Fish and Game is one of those funds that rescue, search and rescue comes out of, and we had a shortfall there on the right now. If we have to use a helicopter, it's like some enormous amount of money for it to go and rescue somebody off the side of a mountain. And another thing, what happens is all of a sudden a bill comes in front of us about, right now if somebody gets rescued, they're supposed to pay the cost. But the way it works out isn't quite that way because of the fact that it costs more money to collect it than it's worth. So that's not panning out the way it was thought. But what we see now is we need the money, and Fish and Game is constantly being rated as one of those dedicated funds. So.
But let's face it, search and rescue never has enough money because they don't go after the money when they rescue somebody. They say it's too much effort. Well, then what you're saying is it's too much effort. Every property owner in New Hampshire should pay for that hiker who went up without adequate protection. A few of those hikers have an accident, broken leg or whatever, and need to be, but the majority of them, something else happens that could have been prevented. And Fish and Game chooses not to make those collections.
Well, actually, it's not Fish and
I got to
Game.
step in
It's
here.
the
'cause
Attorney General's
That's one thing
office.
I got to step in.
Gene's
Well, I mean, but they need to push from the agency to the AG, because the AG will only do what the agency pushes, and we have seen that year after year after year. So that push has to come into the AG's office, and then they would make it a priority.
I think
But
we
if
need to
you
make
say,
it clear that
No, I'm not pushing, then they say, I've got more work to do over
I'll
here.
stand up for the department on this one and say
Yeah.
they do a good job trying on that.
yeah.
Because you have to, the only way we can collect, we just can't collect for someone that goes out hiking and gets
No.
lost overnight. We don't have the means to collect for that. There has to be negligence. And that has to be able to be proved. So that's when the AG's office comes in. Now, one thing that came is, I was shocked when I heard this, that the AG's office gets 48, 50%
Yeah.
of all the money they collect.
I
And I'm
was
thinking, what's this all
surprised to
about?
hear that too. It's
So
like a collection.
I was going to propose,
company.
but I didn't because it was kind of too late for a bill. But next year, I'm going to propose, let the AG's office, the Fish and Game, just don't let them have all the money if they're going to do all the work. But I mean, this is, I was just shocked at that. I'm thinking, well, that's what they're supposed to do, isn't it? Why are they keeping the money? But nonetheless, it is the people that are just, can be proven negligent that they can collect on. And Fish and Game is pretty aggressive on trying that. The problem on the collections, in a lot of cases, they're from out of state. Yeah. Very difficult. But anyway, having said that, there is money in the budget this year for Fish and Game, and which I think is appropriate. Some of the general fund should pay. Most of those search and rescues involve people who aren't hunters and fishermen, so the hunters and fishermen who have been paying for that shouldn't be responsible to pay those fees. And these people are hikers, supposedly, a lot of them are up here, they're staying overnight, they're contributing room and meals taxes. So I think there is a responsibility on the part of the state to contribute something, and that money is thanks to the Finance Committee, and the governor put it in, and the Finance Committee left it there, and now it's on to the Senate. So hopefully that'll stay. I think it's 200,000.
Yeah,
I think it was
So
200,000.
which will be helpful.
And the AG is completely funded by the general fund. So the AG is not like a private law firm trying to get money to pay their utilities and pay their staff and pay their salaries. They are completely funded by the budget. So
Right.
for them to keep 48% of that is just bizarre.
Yeah, it just doesn't make
Now,
any sense.
but when they keep that, does that go into their budget so they can spend more?
Yes.
Is that how it works?
Yeah, but we need to fix that, but that's another
Yeah,
issue.
that
That's
is-
another day.
And that's not necessary. See, that's not really a budget issue, because that needs to go in front of a policy committee, for probably 2 policy committees. While it interacts with money, the AG's budget comes to Division 1. We look at it, we fund it. He or she, it's going to be he again, spends it. So they're funded like any other agency. Why they would need to collect 48% or 5% from you and 10% for this, and that just blows
And I haven't
my
done
mind.
enough to find out if they do that with other agencies or not, because the AG's office has a member in most of the bigger state agencies. There's an AG member representing them. It's kind of like a staff person from the AG's office on DOT. All those big agencies have someone, DES. I just can't imagine. So, but that's a whole other issue, which is, as Representative Ober said, makes sense. We fund them through the general fund, and yet they can go charge another agency. And it may be because they think the other agency isn't general funded, like Fish and Game, that they're able to get away with doing that. I don't really know. But
Well, we ask about the Liquor Commission, because that's an enterprise fund, which is a dedicated fund, by the way. And they have spent, Michael Delaney, who is the outgoing AG, or I guess has gone now as AG, came to Division I and said they had spent about $270,000 since 2010 up till current time. But in 2 instances, Michael Delaney had them hire their own attorney. When Commissioner Mark Bodie was being investigated, they hired their own attorney. That cost them $76,000. The warehouse RFP and subsequent contract, Michael Delaney told them to hire their own outside counsel, that the AG's office could not support them, and up to some point in time in March, they had already spent $267,000 on the RFP for the liquor contract. No work had been paid for or actually submitted for the 3 lawsuits that are currently ongoing regarding that contract. So I would imagine that will get close to $1 million before they're done.
Yeah, they're still fighting that. I saw
Oh,
that
yeah.
in the front page of the paper that
that's a whole
there's issues
other
with
Well, then you also have, like last session, we had the issue of whether or not we would accept Obamacare, and the Attorney General kind of went off on his own, and he was going to actually sue us, the legislators. So, you know, it kind of, when you look at that, okay, so he sues us, we go to court, and it costs us to pay for the lawsuit both ends, because we are the people in New Hampshire would pay either way.
Yes.
So we'll get back to the budget. Is there a time frame that we need to bring forth a balanced budget, obviously?
The Senate has to vote that out shortly after May revenues come in.
yeah, because the first day of committee conference is to be formed is what, the first week in June? That's
Right, and so they need to vote it out right at the end of May, as they know what the revenues are for the month of May. And they won't agree with us. I mean, you and your wife probably don't agree.
They'll agree with us, pretty much.
They won't agree with the
The
budget that
House.
was passed
Right.
by
The
the
House as a
They'll-
whole,
the
which
House's
is
budget.
The
right.
House's budget,
Right.
they'll be pretty close to what we like. I'm
They'll be
sure,
close
but-
to what the Republicans thought
right,
should be a
right,
good
right.
budget.
That's
They
'cause
won't be
they're-
close to the whole House
Right,
budget
right.
as passed,
I
yes.
just wanted to point that
Yes,
out.
I know, you're right.
What was the vote? Do you remember the vote down party lines on the bill? Was it unanimous for the Republicans?
Yes, it was
Yes, every
unanimous.
Republican voted against House Bill 1 and against House Bill 2.
So that mean that
Everyone that was there, now we were missing a few, but every person, I
Right.
think, I don't know why the number, I can't think, but whatever, all of the Republicans stuck together on that issue.
I mean, I think that's an important message out there that the Republicans, there was so many taxes in this
Yeah.
budget that they didn't like, that they were unanimous in
And
voting.
I can't
were.
remember the last time, I don't even know, I'm sure it's happened, but when every single Republican president voted one way or the other for or against something, I don't know when that was. But so it was, to have it twice in one day was pretty historic, and it was good that we had stuck together on those issues.
But every tax bill that passed showed up as a section in House Bill 2. So that was just that tax passed the House. You hoped the Senate would kill it. House Democrats put it into House Bill 2, so it would pass the House the second time, and somebody would then have to take it out. And they spent all that money.
Yeah.
They spent every penny.
And that was a long day in the House when we did the
yeah.
budget. I think there was a lot of amendments as well, wasn't there? It was like
There was
17?
attempts for amendments.
Well, quite a
that
few.
failed.
We as House Republican leadership, I think we proposed 8, I think.
Yeah.
It's something like that. And we came within 1 on one of them and 4
Yeah,
on
that was-
another.
Yeah,
and
that
then
was
we
pretty
lost it.
close.
But Republicans pretty much stuck together on most of all our amendments that we tried, and most of them were to not do the taxes if there were taxes in there, something like that.
Right.
And so I think that was important. And if for nothing else, as we are the minority, and we remember that very well, but it was there, the Senate, the Republicans are in the majority. So part of our job, well, my job, and Lynn and the rest of the Republicans, is to give them a little enforcement. Yeah, we think this is the right thing to do, so they're not completely, when they get over there all by themselves, they know they've got some support on the other side for some of these measures. But I can't stress enough how difficult this is going to be to resolve the situation. It's just, I don't know as I've ever seen, well, such a massive difference in what the Senate will come out with. I don't know exactly, but I have a good idea. It's going to be just dramatically different than what the House's budget is, the Democrat budget, and so it's going to be a problem, I can tell you.
Now, how does the committee of conference going to work on this? I mean, of course, they're not going to, so you're going to have to go and you're going to have to sit down and work something out. Now, how is that going to work with the Senate being in, the Senate's Republican, but the House is Democrat?
It's going to be, and I'll say from my own opinion, I honestly don't see it happening. I just don't think that it will happen. But I'm hoping that it will, and I'm hoping something can get worked out. But I think the divide is going to be so great, and it isn't like there's just one or two major issues. There's always one or two, and then someone gives on, I mean, I could tell you 20 probably right now of major differences, not just little things that people want, huge differences. It's going to be very difficult, and I guess that's an understatement.
And we've had that happen before. When Craig Benson was governor, the budget did not get agreed upon in the committee of conference by the end of June. And they do what they call a continuing resolution so that state government doesn't shut down. So they continue what they see as major initiatives. But for example, DRA has in this current budget, which the governor supported, 35 new full-time employees. So DRA will be hiring 0 new employees if we were under a continuing resolution. DRA would continue as they were, people would not be furloughed, services would continue, work would go on the budget. It has happened before.
And usually, excuse me, I do want to point out one thing, and because a lot of people understand that you can't have a continuing resolution. The problem is going to be, once again, what people don't understand sometimes is that has to be agreed to by both bodies.
Yes, it does.
So if you have a complete disconnect with the budget, you may very well have a pretty much of a complete disconnect on what level of a continuing resolution.
So we can hit a fiscal cliff here.
Very quick things. Yeah, it could happen. I'm hoping that cooler heads would prevail if there were a continuing resolution and adopt something for a couple. Usually it's 2-3 months till September. Nothing's going to happen July and August. I mean, people can meet and talk.
So now what happens if we don't? Do we just continue with the previous budget?
No, you shut down. You close.
Shut down.
People go to work. If there's no continuing resolution, there's no.
And have you seen that in all the time that you've been up there? That's never happened.
Come close a couple times, but there's always been a continuing resolution. And as I said, no matter what the budget issues are, I'm hoping that, but it's still a problem because if I can, obviously there's a difference of opinion, Democrats and Republicans, everyone understands that, but it means that to have a continuing resolution at the same level would mean essentially the Democrats would have to adopt the Republican budget from 2 years ago levels. I'm sure the Senate won't have a problem
that's kind of what my question was.
Right.
If we continue on that, with the continuous resolution, then they'll be at the lower spending for the 3 months.
And yes.
So they get the advantage of the Republicans' budget. So
but I don't know if they will agree to that.
I don't know if they'll agree to it, but I think they would be foolish to totally disagree and shut down government.
Yeah, it doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
No, and that would be a huge issue if they got to that point.
And one would hope that it would be, at least something could be agreed to for 3 months. But I don't know, we'll see.
It's never happened yet, though, so chances are they'll...
Right.
Well, it happened under Benson.
Well,
it did. It actually
continuing a resolution.
Resolution, that happened.
They didn't shut down government, but they did continue because they could not agree.
And then, interestingly enough, because Benson, I'm trying to think, he actually vetoed it, I think, didn't he? Yeah.
I wasn't in the legislature then, so.
But anyway, we ended up passing a budget that was higher than what he was supposed to at the time. The end result was one that was higher by a little bit, which is odd, but nonetheless.
Yeah.
the way it works.
Bottom line of revenues, if budget's high, you need higher revenues, so.
Well, yeah, but I'll get back to that key thing is the higher revenues need to be sustainable and something's realistic. Not like Representative Ober said this last time during the budget. Now, Representative Army had no indication what the April revenues was going to be, and when she just went in and raised revenues, that was just to cover the spending.
That's
okay,
exactly
well, I
what
need-
she
yeah,
did
right.
before we passed it to the House.
And they, last session, well, before we got in there, they also had the advantage of there was all kinds of stimulus money coming into the state that was
Yes.
Time
spent.
money, yeah, get you in a
One-time money.
problem.
So one-time money, so that doesn't solve our problem, that just creates even a bigger, because if you spend it and you adjust your budget to that, then when it goes away, all of a sudden you have a shortfall.
Well, that money wasn't put in the budget, but they used it in various ways so it offset some of the budget costs. And then in Health and Human Services, because there were all these strings attached to stimulus money, it was supposed to be for new projects. They were supposed to be shovel ready, so you were ready to go on the ground and provide jobs. And sometimes that worked, sometimes that didn't. And Health and Human Services, they added a whole bunch of programs for 1 year. And 1 year only, the federal government couldn't sustain that kind of spending in New Hampshire, and New Hampshire couldn't sustain it. So unfortunately, all those programs came to an end at the time Bill O'Brien became Speaker. So 2 years ago, we're balancing the budget, and all the stimulus money is cut off and gone away, and people are like, wait, what happened to this
Where's my
program I've been
program?
using
Right,
all
right,
year?
right.
And that's the year that we got elected, and,
Right.
and we made a lot of hard decisions. They weren't
Yes.
easy either,
No.
you know.
Right. And
But
that
we
is a
did it.
problem,
You know, we took care of that $800 million.
Every budget has one-time money. It's how you handle it that makes the difference and what you use it for. And
Right.
creating new programs is not a smart thing to do with one-time money.
Right.
The other thing the Democrats did in this budget was they took $9 million from the MTBE settlement. If you recall, when MTBE was in gasoline, it was found if it got into the groundwater, there was no way to cleanse it. What you could do was filter it out, and over decades, rain and whatever would lower the level of MTBE. So if you have it in your groundwater, you have to filter for decades. So we have a huge settlement, and they took every penny of what can be used for administering this and spent it in other programs. So while the filtering's still there, they are spending the administration money elsewhere. So I don't know who is going to monitor whether the filtering is working or not.
So, I mean, usually you would see if a local person needed help with that, with groundwater pollution from gasoline additives, they'd go to DES, I would
DES.
imagine. And so do those programs still exist?
Well, they
They're
exist,
non-existent, or-
but the administration money that normally DES would spend for the monitoring and the administering what they needed to do to make sure the filters were working is being spent in the budget on other things.
That's interesting. Do you have a question, Jim?
No, I do, but I got to look for it.
Yeah.
So, if you have one, go ahead and do it.
Yep. So again, by the end of May, early June, we should know more about,
This is
How the
what
budget will
Senate
shake
will
out,
do.
right.
Yes,
and then after that, committee of conference.
yes.
That's when. Who appoints these people to the committee of conference?
Speaker.
Speaker, and then
You
Senate
had
And
to-
the Senate President from the other side.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you had to have voted for the budget in order to be considered. You have to vote in a positive way on the bill, not just the budget bill, but there are committee conferences on other bills. So House Republicans got together and we told Representative Kirk to vote yes on the budget and yes on House Bill 2. And the rest of us voted against it in committee so that we would have one eligible member to sit on the committee of conference. 2 years ago, when the Democrats were in the minority, none of them would vote yes on House Bill 1 or House Bill 2. And then at the time, Terry Norelli, who's now Speaker, was the minority leader, and she was in the paper outraged because no Democrats got appointed to the budget committee conferences, but none of them would vote for it in committee. So we made a point this year when we voted to speak to that vote and speak to the fact we did it because of the committee of conference and that we didn't want to go through the same ugliness that we'd had 2 years ago when they all voted no and then were upset when nobody could go onto the committee of conference. So we at least have a seat. Representative Kirk would ultimately be replaced because he won't vote for the budget, so he won't vote yes on the committee of conference. I doubt it will get to a point where it will be acceptable to House Republicans, and then they would replace him. That happened to Senator Lou D'Alessandro. Last term, he was on for the Senate, but before the final vote, he had been replaced with a Republican who voted the way the Senate wanted to vote. But you have a voice at the table. You have an opportunity to present amendments. You have an opportunity to make your points heard at the committee of conference table, and that's important.
Right. How many members in the committee of conference typically is it?
5 House members and 4 Senate members on the budget bills.
With
4
some,
regular bills, 4 members and 3, but
yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have some alternates in the
alternates,
House ones.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and that has to be unanimous. The result of that, everyone has to agree on whatever they come up with for a,
Oh,
for a
so if there's
compromise.
one holdout, then
He just gets, he or she, they just replace
They just
them.
get, they just get
Put
them
someone else on
replaced.
that
Wow,
agrees.
so I learned something new.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
you
didn't
can't
know that
have
either.
any negative votes on a
Right.
committee conference. That kills the bill.
Okay, interesting.
Okay, so that's interesting. So eventually they do get it, right?
Well, not always, because sometimes, there's plenty of them that don't reach agreement.
Plenty
but-
of the committee conferences
but
just
on-
die.
Right, but on the major issues or something, they will, or they'll just be, someone will be
Well, the budget they
replaced, but-
can't let die because
No, they can't. The budget has to pass, so they would replace the person who was not going to vote yes.
All right, well, I just got the word that we're pretty much out of
Oh,
time. We got a couple more minutes here
Okay.
just to do a closing, and I'd ask you both to, starting with Lynn, you might as well go first, and you can close up and
Well, I want to say thank you for having Gene and myself today. I think it's important for people to understand the budget process because in government, it's a little different than private industry, and we do have both branches. I mean, even if you have a budget committee in town and voters, the voters either say yay or nay and it's done with. Whereas in government, a no vote just means you're going to have to go back to the table and hammer out the compromise. And I think that's an important piece, and I appreciate the fact you took the time to have us here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's great. I'm glad to come down. One thing I'll mention, we've been talking about the budget, which of course is a partisan issue, and the partisan issues are the ones that make the newspapers all the time. I always throw out a number, and I don't know how accurate it is, but certainly 80% and 90% probably of what we do is nonpartisan.
Yes.
The bills that are in committee, either killed or passed, and on the House floor killed or passed, are nonpartisan issues. They don't get much attention, so it's always this, they think it's constant bickering, and that just isn't the case. I mean, no matter who's in charge, it's always a number of issues that people are looking after the best interests of the state of New Hampshire, and they agree to work them out. And but so I think that's important. We don't stress that enough sometimes, I think. So, but thanks for having us on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, this has been the Legislators Lounge, show number 6 on the state budget. You can find more information on this if you want on our website, which is derrylounge.com, or you can find us on Facebook, and we also have a YouTube channel where all our videos are put up as soon as they're compiled. And I'd like to say thank you for coming on the show, and that's it for the show.
See you back in
Thanks
Concord.
again. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you.